This war's gone on for far too long.
Everbloom. No, I'm not going to try and pronounce her name. This one is a request. Believe it or not, you can actually do these. So, we're going to cover a couple of infantry officers, as well as something else. But today, it's Everbloom. What do we have? Infantry Field Defense. As always, we'll discuss the skills, we'll rate the skills, then we'll talk about potential uses and possible combinations and maybe compare it to someone else. The first skill, the tactical skill, Jungle Pathfinder. This officer's troop gains a shield coefficient of up to 1500. If this officer is in an infantry troop, the shield coefficient is increased by 25%. Now, I don't always like these sorts of skills, because it's like, here's a skill that does something, and if it's been assigned to the correct unit, you get an extra 25%. Dude, just give me the extra 25% to begin with. It does mean you get over 1800 shield on an infantry unit. It's a 4, not a 5. I'd like the shield to do something else. I think I'd be more impressed if it was a 1500 coefficient shield with, like, say, a 25% damage decrease, much like we've seen with Uncle recently. You know, he gives us a shield and then he gives us a damage resist. Okay, his already goes up to 1800. So,
All I want is a quiet life.
for a shield, it's a 4. Second skill, Survival Guide. Reduces the skill damage this officer troop takes by up to 30%. This is a brilliant skill if you have the capacity to train this onto your main soak, like a super heavy or perhaps an additional infantry unit. It's a very good skill. 30% skill damage reduction is what we are seeing for the base with Steel Fighter, which has now been made irrelevant again by Uncle. So, just as a skill, the fact that it doesn't need to be awakened and it's trainable, I think this is a 5 because the value within this skill is extremely high. Both trainability and its direct use for this unit. Extremely good skill. 30% skill damage. If you've been watching the PvP videos I put out, you'll see how high some of the skill damage shots can get. Reducing that by 30% is a significant advantage. So that's going to be a 5. Third skill, Hidden Trenches. Increases the HP of this officer's infantry by up to 10% and the blast damage resist by up to 50%. This is really good for the infantry, specifically because they're obviously their weakest form of damage. They're most vulnerable towards blast damage. So things like rockets and howitzers are going to deal the most types of damage to infantry, and we're able to reduce the standard attack damage by up to 50%. So if you're using infantry to attack a base, Everbloom's looking more and more like a necessity. And let's be honest, if you're using infantry, there's really only one reason why you're going to use infantry, and that's to attack a base. You're not going to use her for anything else. I'm sorry, but she's... Infantry in the field for field fighting and for base defense aren't exactly the greatest things in the world. But when you're attacking a base, if you have the correct officers at any level, infantry are phenomenal. So we've already got a 30% reduction on skills, and now we've got a 50% blast reduction on artillery. This, I think, is a 4. The HP does also come into play quite heavily here, as it will boost the shield coefficient. It's not a 5 just on the grounds that it's not a damage resist, it's just blast damage resist. That being said, it is exceptionally high for a blast damage resist. You can't really train this skill because it is for infantry units only. So it's a 4, but it's so close to being a 5. Rapid support. Whenever this officer's infantry troop enters combat, increases the firepower of this officer's troop and up to 2 friendly troops nearby by up to 10% for 15 seconds. I like this, but it's not that great. A 10% increase in your firepower for 15 seconds is mediocre at best, and I do mean at best. This skill is particularly disappointing. It only lasts for 15 seconds. It cannot be reapplied. You need to obviously exit combat and then re-enter combat in order for it to work. This is less than stellar. There isn't a lot that you can say about this that's going to improve what it is. I mean, you can train firepower off more or less anyone else to that level as a trainable skill. Firepower buff of 30. It goes up to 35. Literally the person above her on my list.
This war's gone on for far too long.
I think this is a wasted skill. I don't think this is a particularly good skill. I wouldn't train this skill. It's restricted to infantry only if you do choose to train this skill. And firepower is just low. The 10% firepower buff is just low for 15 seconds. I think this is potentially one of the worst skills in the game. And it doesn't, you don't get to choose which units are actually given the buff. If it was all friendly units within one map grid, at least you could say, hey, everything inside the base and a base defense scenario is getting 10% for 15 seconds. You can't even say that with the skill because you don't know which units are being affected. It's a 1. It's a 1. It's just a wasted skill. It's just a pointless thing to put points into. It's when you've got the previous skills to take into consideration, this is just an absolute waste. It really lets the character down because up until this point there's so much potential value in this character. And for 3 skills in the run up to this, I mean 3 out of the 4 regular skills before we get to the Awakened, amazing skills. This skill pants. The Awakened skill, Live Another Day. It is a new skill, so we are getting effectively 5 skills instead of 4 and one of them being upgraded. So that's a good sign. Maybe we can redeem some semblance of score out of this. Increases the damage resist of this officer's infantry by 10% for every 10% of HP they lose. Their damage resist is increased by an extra 5% up to 20%. So the more you kill her, the harder she is to kill. Absolutely perfect for assaulting a base. She gets a maximum of 30% damage resistance. All damage across the board reduced by 30%. Oh, we haven't even got into potential pairings or what we can compare her to yet. That is something extra. It does what it says on the tin. It is a field defense skill, and it is certainly going to make the infantry at higher levels very, very hard to kill, especially if you put the right parts on the infantry troop. If we're looking at putting in parts that reduce damage, even further, because let's be honest, the infantry damage pool does not exist. Don't try to pretend it does. I feel like to be a 5, it should be a flat 20 with maybe something else. But it's a flat 10, and then it goes up to an additional 20, making it 30. So I think this skill's a 4. This nets her a 3.6 out of 5. Certainly not the best, certainly not the worst, but infantry has a very specific role in this game. So, as I said before, you're not using infantry to really lead the way with damage, much like the SH. You either pick the SH or you pick infantry if you're going to have a soak unit attack another base. For the most part, in silver, you're going to see the SH. You're not going to really see the infantry due to the amount of people maxing out units, rockets, and howitzers. You probably very specifically want to put her on the Marty infantry because you want to increase the amount of HP you have. You want to really increase the benefits from the bunker. She's one of those characters that the more you can layer that damage resist on, it's going to massively benefit the infantry in the longer run. There aren't many like if I saw her in the field running infantry, I would ignore them. I would just drive round them. Plain and simple. I wouldn't bother engaging the infantry at all. The infantry deal very little threat. Very little damage. I know there's going to be someone out there saying, oh, but my 9.2 infantry. It's like, yes, okay, right, sure. Yeah, your 9.2 infantry is going to smash my 7.1 artillery. Good for you. Thumbs up. Let's be honest. It's got the same damage. Infantry has the same damage output as an SH. The difference being, quite heavily the difference being, is that infantry attack constantly. So anything with applied stats that you could train in as a special skill, things like critical strike, for example, it's the best example I can give off the top of my head, because it's chance on attack and the attacks are constant. You can produce results. What other skills have we got?
Negotiate. The only way I negotiate is with a bullet.
So, like I just said, rate of fire plays into quite a lot of things quite heavily. If you were to train preemptive attack on the infantry, for whatever reason you don't have an artillery unit, and for whatever reason you don't have this guy in your lineup, because you're insane, or I don't know, maybe you're just a sadomasochist, this sort of skill, which is applied on attack, you want a high rate of fire, ideally. Let's be fair, ideally, because then it's being thrown out, the debuff or the stat is being applied to the target, and then when you attack again, it's being repeated.
I need a partner. Someone I can rely on.
Yes, he is awake now. Same with Master Hacker, for example. Whenever this officer's troop attacks, whenever this officer troop lands an attack, it has a 10% chance of becoming critical. So when you're looking at setting up your infantry special skills that you're going to be training in from the outside, it's very, very important that we look at things like chance on attack, because infantry have an extremely high attack rate. But those are just some examples. Who would I pair her with? Now, I do have a second account where my main unit is actually infantry. And the reason why I done this is because in silver, we very rarely see infantry being run, and I like to know how infantry work because it's not something I get to see a lot. It's something I hear a lot of when people come down from gold. They say, oh, infantry are really powerful. I see videos on YouTube saying infantry are really powerful. And I don't really get to see it and experience it for myself. So I have invested in infantry. And the first character for infantry I invested in is, in fact, Everbloom. And I paired her with Vox, and I don't think that's a good idea. I think that's I should rephrase that. I don't think that's a bad idea, but I think there are probably better options. For example, Lonesome Star. I do believe that Lonesome Star is perhaps a better pairing option. We have damage coefficient, and it does splash damage. It's very high. We have a trainable skill here, because it can be applied to anyone, of an additional shield that goes up to 500. This skill by itself, by the way, perfect. We're not here to talk about him. You could apply this guy as an aid, maybe, to Everbloom, and you would have a lot of damage resist coming out of that unit. I personally went for Vox. Vox is my favourite defensive aid. You know, we have, again, when this officer troop attacks, the ground force has a 30%. Whenever this officer's troop attacks an enemy ground force troop, the attack has a 30% chance to inflict them a fatigue. So this is quite a useful field fighting or defensive tactic that you can use on your unit, and you can put this on Vox. You put Vox in the aid slot. This can be applied through rate of fire. Very, very handy little skill. Those are the only two officers I would run her with. Everbloom's a good officer, but some of the other infantry officers, I mean, he deals a lot of skill damage, but skill damage is based off troop damage. Troop damage for infantry is not particularly high. We do have HP buffs, which would be handy, but you can train this in. You don't necessarily need it. I don't hate Iron Bastion as an option. When it comes to infantry, you're really spoilt for choice. But at the same time, none of those choices blow my mind. Because when you get things like damage coefficient for your infantry, it's like, well, do I need the damage coefficient? I'm not using this unit to damage. I'm using this unit to take damage. I want this unit to be shot at. I don't need it to be shooting. That's what I have the artillery guns for. That's what I have the tanks for. Undoubtedly, you have this person awakened. White Wolf. Splash damage. Anti-tank grenade. Yeah, I mean, if Everbloom wasn't in the game, I would probably say Bastion and Wolf, with Wolf being the aid, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I will be honest. It makes little difference. Probably that. I mean, we've got a bunker damage resistance coefficient here. That's a fantastic skill. 15% bunker resist coefficient of up to 15%. Fantastic skill. But it can be trained. This is the thing. It can be trained in onto Vox as the aid. It can be trained into Everbloom as the captain. You don't need this officer. There's not enough on this officer for me to go, hey, you should probably pair up. And as I said before, you're not using infantry to deal damage. If you're using your infantry to try and deal damage, you're going to get outmatched. There isn't much else I can say. I feel like I've gone over the ground quite a bit here. She's a good officer. 3.6 I feel was harsh, but that's because of the one skill that let her down. If she'd have scored a 3 or a 4 on that skill, I feel like the skill would more accurately represent the need for you to use this officer if you have infantry. And make no mistake, if you have infantry, this officer should be the captain, and you do need her because infantry is what is going to be leading the way for you, and you need your army to be set up around the infantry. For other people, such as myself who use SHs, we don't need to set up the army around the SH. We can set the army up around the artillery piece, or the tank, or the helicopter, or the light tank if you're a fucking weirdo. But with infantry, your army needs to be set up around the infantry due to how vulnerable they are. And her score is low for what it could be. Out of the 5 overall skills, 1 was really bad. Just remember that. Just 1 skill let her down for the points, but you still need this officer.